Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I do acknowledge the difficulty to have a session at 1:45 on the Friday afternoon, but I have to say we have a fantastic panel. So whoever of you was so brave to stay here at that time, I think you would be treated very well. And hopefully other people will realize this. The subject of this week, Transforming Transportation Conference, is really connecting people for sustainable growth. I can see in all infrastructure there are similarities that are very, very close. I mean, we are looking for accessible, efficient, safe, and green transportation. To me, in the energy sector, it really look like SDG 7 all over again with different words. And I think it is not surprising of being in that way. I think it's a very important session because it's very easy to talk about accessible, efficient, clean, and safe transportation, but then you have to do it, which is a completely different set of issues. And I think the session today is very important. We have very, very good panelists that can talk about policies, how to develop them, business, financial models, experience, reaction from the consumers, technology, very, very important as well. So without further ado, I think we can start in this way. I have to say, as I said, there are 5 distinguished panelists, and they will have all give us their view on the prospect for electric vehicles to become one of the key solutions for cleaner mobility and GHG reduction. With electric vehicles becoming mass market products, it is time for an in-depth understanding on how to remove the initial barriers of technological penetration and how this can be implemented including all over the world, including developing countries. So let me start the discussion with one of our great guests, Dr. Feng An, who is a world-renowned expert in clean transportation, energy technologies, and climate policies. He founded the Innovation Center for Energy and Transportation in California and Beijing to create a world-class think tank to promote policy changes for low-carbon development and sustainable future. So welcome, Dr. Feng An. So the question, every panelist will have a 5-minute presentation, a 5-minute introduction. So Dr. Feng An, how do you assess the current status and prospects of clean transport solutions, including electric vehicles in nowadays world?
Thank you. So in our view, there are 5 major trends in the clean transportation space. I think 2 are led by the government. I think the topics of this panel is through private sectors. I think what it really means is the private-public partnership. I think the first measure is improving fuel economy and to improve the emission standards to clean up the diesel engine and gasoline engines. I think those still prove to be very effective. And the other major trend is the electrification. Government push led effort to electrify transportation. So the other 2 trends actually is led by the industry. I think it's the micromobility and the automation. This is entirely led by industry, and the government is trying to play catch up. And so I think the other major trend is it's called mobility as a service, MaaS. I think this is something is going to be a ultimate goal. That people view transportation as a service. So the people may forget about their underlying powertrains, vehicles. They just I think that's connect people to mobility service. I think that is what we are talking about. But I think for the electric vehicle, if you look at multiple globally, I think many countries have proposed a timetable to ban international combustion engines. I think China is also following the suit. California led the global effort to start the zero emission vehicle mandate. And China actually started that journey right after financial crisis in 2009. EV sector is one of the pillar sector Chinese government identified. So that's how they jump-started the EV revolution, and now China lead a global EV market. I think that's really the government play very strong hand, and automakers, after many years of reluctance, and they start to embrace the electric vehicles. So for them, the EV is no longer an option; it's about their future survival. So if you, see the statement made by VW and Ford and Toyota, one after another, they are going to increase the EV offerings and the R&Ds and reduce and cut off all the traditional internal combustion research. And this actually demonstrated by the success of Tesla. Their market value is bigger than General Motors plus Ford combined. So this is the future. So we see very clear trends in the global, for the electrified, vehicles and entire transportation system.
Thank you very much. Our minute counter has remained unemployed for this. So thank you very much for such an efficient delivery. Thank you. Dr. Fangan, thank you very much. Let me now turn to Juan Carlos González Calderón, who is the Chief of Staff of the Minister of Transport and Telecommunications of Chile. In addition to his multiple public responsibilities for the Chilean government and the International Public Transportation Union, Juan Carlos, together with other personalities, created the Foundation Transurbano, an important NGO that promotes sustainable mobility. So, Juan Carlos, how a country like Chile is implementing policies aiming at promoting e-mobility and other cleaner mobility solutions? What challenges are you encountering? Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello for everyone. We have to recognize, first of all, that this initiative comes from the private sector. The first idea came from an alliance between 3 companies that bring the project to the minister, Hood, she's here, and we accept the project quickly to start the improvement for the public transport that we need urgently in Santiago. So in this moment, we realize that that we have a partnership, a virtual partnership between the public and private sector, because we are together in the challenge to bring the people a good alternative of mobility and public transportation specifically. So we study together business model and finance model. We bring the first 100 buses from China with Italian finance from Enel, and the buses are BYD. And the company, Chilean company, Medbus, do all the planification of the electrification of depots, the capacitation of the drivers and the mechanics, and the training about the softwares and the maintenance of the buses. The operation, it was very successful. And actually, currently we have 400 electric buses in Santiago. So there are different operations. There's a second operation for 400 buses with the same model, but the companies now was Yutong, like the manufacturer, NG is a utility that financed the project, and Bule is the local bus company that explode the vehicles. And now have a third alliance between King Long, like a manufacturer, Neot, it's a bank related to the EDF company in France, and Transdev is the operator of the buses. Transdev is operating in Santiago. So we think that that model is very successful, is very sustainable, reduce the cost, not just despite of the reduce of the cost on operation in energy, maintenance, everything. The cost of the operation is cheaper than the traditional bus purchase, no? Because there's a new actors in the finance market. That's the difference. Usually the finance comes from the bank related to the manufacturer. In this case, it's different because the finance comes from the utilities, moved by the interest to increase the use of electricity. So in Chile, always the electricity is the most sustainable source of energy and the most abundant. No, we don't have petrol or diesel or anything or gas. No, we have a lot of electricity and the most is renewable for sun and wind sources. And the challenge, we have the challenge to bring the model to the regions, to the small cities of the rest of the cities of Chile. And we have there a problem with the structure of the companies. They're very traditional and familiar and small companies. They don't have capacity for investment. So we're trying to support this area to put some innovations in the business models and the finance models. Our goal is one electric service in each city of Chile at the end of the government. We have 2 years for this, and we're starting very soon. And I think there's another challenge is the human capital. No, you need new drivers, new mechanics, new technicals, and new users also, because that kind of vehicle it have a different behavior of the traditional vehicles, no? And the maintenance and the management of the vehicle is different also. So this is a good challenge, but I think we can be a very good success in this. Thank you.
Juan Carlos, thank you very much. It's incredibly interesting how electricity companies are trying to integrate downward the value chain in order to sell their electricity, and in this way helping sustainable mobility. Very interesting also the point about the reskilling of the workforce, that obviously have to change the kind of technological instrument they're using. But very, very interesting. I'm sure we'll have time later a little bit more. Our next panelist is Dr. Kyu Kim, the head of the Autonomous Driving and Future Vehicle Center in the Korea Transportation Institute, where he has been leading more than 75 research projects in the field of transportation systems, electric vehicles, and automated vehicles. Dr. Kyu Kim, from a researcher perspective, how do you see the future of electric vehicles, and what can we expect from the smart cities we will be living in tomorrow? Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyu Kim, working for the Korea Transport Institute. I have been involved in developing the electric bus system and autonomous vehicle, and currently I'm leading a project for preparing the policy guidelines for autonomous vehicle for improving the public acceptance. And I was involved in the several projects that is related with e-mobility. And I think e-mobility is a core component of the smart mobility that is pushing the transportation be cleaner and comfortable and more efficient in terms of the energy. And I think in the future, the transportation system will be supported mainly by the cars. And in Korea, we have many experience in developing the electric buses, such as wireless electric bus and battery swapping electric bus and plug-in type. And we recognize that those electric buses are available for reducing the pollution in an urban area. And in these years, the plug-in type of the electric bus have been popular in the world as well as the Korea. And I see that in future, the electric e-mobility will be more flexible in the selection of transportation mode. And we have more options for using the electric type of the transportation. And we can use the scooter and the e-bicycle and the electric buses. And it's very, I think those kinds of the transportation mode will be spread wisely, more the wider. And then the second point of my viewpoint is that this e-mobility will be more integrated with mobility service platform. And I think the platform is being transforming with the several types of the functions, and it can collect with the passenger's car the data from on roadside, and this data platform will be integrated with the transportation and the smart grid system. So the engineers working through the urban area will be more efficiently working for improving the safety and the environment through the urban area. And so the point is that the e-mobility will be served by on-demand service, especially based on the autonomous technology. I'd like to point out the importance of autonomous technology for the e-mobility future. Most of the electric shuttle is based on the car. I mean, the autonomous shuttle is widely spread for connecting the point to point in an urban area. So in the future, the e-mobility will be forwarding to incorporate the citizens in a point-to-point by minimizing the use of energy. And we need to focus on what's going on the shuttle will be serviced as a transit the part. And even the technology is limited for serving the transit service because of the low speed and the limited running range. And lastly, I'd like to point out the future will be more comfortable by using electric cars and other electric type of the bike or something other, the passenger car. And the users can easily select the journey by integrating some the method for minimizing the energy consumption instead of saving the travel time. So in future, the smarter city will be realized by using the autonomous technology and the e-mobility technology. But I also need to mention that it takes some time for building the infrastructure and for developing new emerging technology for serving that kinds of a service. Yeah, that's all.
Dr. Kyu-Ho Kim, thank you very much. It's great to have kind of a glimpse of the future, and very interesting about autonomous technology on a point-to-point kind of connection and the kind of integration with different means like cars, bikes, and the choice between a quicker kind of journey or a less polluting journey. Very, very, very interesting indeed. It is now my pleasure to turn to Mrs. Margarita Parra, who is a director for the international program at Clean Energy Works. She has been working for 2 decades in Latin America, Asia, India, Europe, and the United States on initiatives to reduce local air pollution and global carbon emissions. More recently, she was part of the Hewlett Foundation, where she managed the low-carbon transport portfolio of their global climate initiative. So, Margarita, what kind of incentives and financing solutions can be implemented to develop cleaner transport solutions, such as e-mobility?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I see so many people kind of sleeping, and we had a great moderator before. I wanted to just maybe bring you guys into the conversation a little bit. So I'm going to be talking about incentives and different finance. So one first thing, we're building on Juan Carlos' point, how many of you have actually ridden an electric bus as a passenger? So that was maybe like 20 hands. How many of you have actually driven the electric bus? One hand, that's excellent. Excellent. So I'm glad to see so many hands, but the reality is that we don't have many electric buses yet on the road. Maybe you are in China, in Shenzhen, yes. Maybe you go to Santiago, you're lucky to be in the Medbus corridor. Bogota, my home city, thanks to some friends in the audience here, is going to have 483 electric buses coming up. But we still have thousands of diesel buses. So it will be lucky for you to be on one of the routes, Fontibon, Usme, to be riding these buses. We want more electric buses. We want all the routes to have electric buses. How we do it? Here's the answer to the questions. How you bring this more incentives to the private sector. So I happen to be working in a small NGO called Clean Energy Works. We believe that energy and clean energy solutions work for everybody. Work for the environment because we want clean energy sources. Work for air pollution because we don't have exhaust pipe pollutions and contaminants. But it also works for investors. If we do it in the right way, clean energy can bring economic benefits to the stakeholders. One stakeholder that has been really a good player in Chile, the electric utilities, Enel and Engie, they have a great role to play. Unfortunately, Enel and Engie are not going to replicate what they did in Chile everywhere. We asked them in Colombia, can you also buy those buses here and do the same financing system that you did in Chile? And the answer was no. Why? Because in Chile, we have a lower risk of investment for the private sector. In Chile, we have some norms and regulations that bring more certainty to that transaction. And we had the federal government, the minister was here, bringing that back up, el respaldo. We want to have these conditions in all countries, but we don't have them. And if we think about even least developed countries, more developing countries, we need to bring different mechanisms. So maybe the utility won't buy the whole bus, but what we're trying to see is what innovations in that financing can happen. So we're looking at other sectors. So in the residential sectors in the US, there is this mechanism called utility on-bill financing, in which, for example, you want to buy a more energy savings air conditioning or a more cost-effective heater because you want to pay less on your bill. But the capital cost of that asset is too high for you to pay upfront. You don't have the money to buy that new equipment. So the utility comes in and buys for you. And you pay to the utility on your bill the cost of this asset. But because you're really consuming less electricity, there is no change in your bill. And at the end, there is a pathway to ownership. You remain with this asset. And then it's a win-win situation. We have a lower electricity consumption. We have less emissions if that electricity comes, of course, for cleaner sources. And then you own your equipment. We thought this can be actually used in transportation. Why not utilities invest on those assets, which are the batteries and the charging infrastructure? And bus operators actually pay on their bills that battery until that cost is recovered, until the utility has recovered the cost, and then the battery is owned by the bus operators. This mechanism is called utility on-bill financing, or utility cost recovery. Pay as you save, also, maybe you have heard of this term. In India, it's actually used for public lighting and other energy efficiency upgrades. I think we have a lot to learn from the energy efficiency sector and apply the solution so that we can be co-investors, utilities and bus operators or transit agencies, to reduce that upfront cost. That always is one of the higher barriers for transforming and bringing electric mobility. Thank you.
Okay. Margarita, thank you very much. You introduced the subject of political risk, financial structures that could mitigate the political risks. Of course, there should be also a reference on the return on investments related to the political risk. And I think we are very lucky because the person who's going to talk next, John Graham, is a senior infrastructure and development banking professional at IFC. So obviously his work focuses primarily on transportation and public-private partnerships in this sector. So John, how can an organization like the World Bank Group and IFC in particular help scale up clean vehicle financing? How can the private sector accelerate this movement?
Yeah, I think accelerate is the right term here. Thank you for the invitation today. I'm John Graham. I'm actually in the global transport group at the IFC down the street, but I also do a lot of work with my colleagues here at the World Bank Group, which is something I'm going to talk about here in a minute. I think if we're going to talk about the challenge and what the IFC can do or what the World Bank can do, I think we have to look at the market first. If you look at the financing market, for example, I mean, there's about $120 trillion of assets under management out there between banks, pension funds, institutional investors, et cetera. And I think we all know that interest rates are really at historical lows. I mean, I don't think we've seen anything like this, at least in my career, in terms of the financing terms and conditions that are available. Maybe in 2007, which is perhaps not a very good example for all of us, but some of us who lived through those projects, those times. But it's the problem these days is not one of financing. And I think, now, is IFC looking at financing projects? Absolutely. Are we looking at new business models? Absolutely. But I think as a global multilateral, I think we have the responsibility to kind of step back and try to look at perhaps what is creating some of these gaps. And it's not financing. It just isn't. Actually, in Chile, for example, these projects with Enel and Engie, I think they had a feast of financing offers. I don't think the problem for them was financing. I mean, it wasn't a lack of money. I think quite the contrary. Is that true in other places? I totally agree with Margarita. That's not the case. So for somebody like IFC, we have three major business units. I mean, there's the infrastructure team where I am, but there's also manufacturing, ag, and services, and there's the financial institutions group. Okay, so within a single institution, you've got basically infrastructure teams like myself that do transportation, but you also have energy teams. You've got the manufacturing, ag, and services teams. So dealing with things like supply chain, we can deal with manufacturers, we can finance, we can advise manufacturers, and then for financial institutions. We work actually a lot with we call it FIG colleagues, because the new business models, in my view, actually, I think are going to be not so much project by project by project in getting at this problem, but they're going to be more like lease vehicles and aggregators and things that we've seen like in the UK, like they're called Roscoes or things that buy quantities of fleets and then pass them down to operators. Which are credit risks that we're just not good at managing, to be honest with you, from Washington. So we've got all the capacities in-house. And on top of that, we've got a practice around cities. And what that gives us, cities, we can finance a municipality, and we do a lot of that. And actually, most of the things that we've done in the electric sector right now, so far in transit, have been financings to cities where the credit risk is actually the city itself, not the nitty-gritty at the operating level of the bus itself and the bus company, et cetera. Those are much more tricky things to finance. But we started with trying to provide capacity and financing to cities themselves. So we really have the tools. I hate to say this, but there's no excuse for us not being good at this. And so it's something that we're working on, I would say, weekly, not only within the IFC, but there's a big push in the institution to coordinate it with, not only with IFC, but also with MIGA and with the World Bank Group as well, with the global practices here. And so we have the right footprint, and I think we have the right professionals, and it's something that we're spending a lot of time on. And I think it's forums like these which allow us to talk to the investors and start to have more and more ideas about where we can put this into practice.
John, thank you very much indeed. I very, very interesting about the aggregators. I also think that is where it will go at a certain point, as soon as the markets will become more mature and the volumes will be bigger. Thank you for reminding us about 2007. I forgot, but it's good. I have to say, certainly in my case, I can see in sense of de-risking, they use more use of the World Bank guarantees in order to help in sense of political risk and all the rest. I've seen it a lot in energy, more rarely in transport. So I think it is something that should be considered a little bit more. Now,
Ricardo, if I may,
please,
sorry.
so.
I think you stepped on it. You touched the nerve. I think the reason why 70 or 80% of project finance is in the energy sector is because of that, is because they've learned to de-risk the revenue profile. And the power purchase agreements on the energy side has not been met with a similar type contract on the transportation side, on the mobility side. And I think a mobility services agreement, or that might be kind of corny, but something like a PPA to support mobility might just be something that we could all think about.
John, thank you very much. It's always interesting to see how different financial structure can be applied to different sectors. Now, we have a kind of quick question, quick answer exercise, and we'll start with Margarita. So I have, in theory, 2 minutes. So is the e-mobility model replicable in the developing world? And what do you see as the key challenges? You already touched a lot about that, but if you want to ask, this is our colleagues and I can intervene, so please.
Yes, but well, maybe we could build on this suggestion. Why don't we have these new service agreements in the transportation sector? Why haven't we de-risked the transportation sector to the same extent that the power sector has done, so that the financing comes easily? And we know that yesterday somebody said here, and as to the challenge, somebody in the audience asked the plenary, well, transport is a service, it's not a business. And we know that. We know public transport doesn't make money. We know we cannot recover all the costs because public transportation is very complex. There is a growing population. There's growing demands of maintenance. We know in most of our cities, public transportation lacks the investment to even keep up. So I think one of the biggest challenges, John, is how we then, within that sector that brings a public service that needs subsidies, and yesterday the Minister of Brazil, I think he left, he was here, he was saying, we always subsidize public transport for a reason, because it's a public service. Within that sector, with those internal characteristics, what will the risk look like? Like, what are the conditions that need to be met? Most of the electrification is happening with the operators that have better balance sheets, which are mostly the operators who have the highest demand routes. You know, but there is so many feeder services that are needed for the higher dense corridors that may not even get to electrification, but they go to the very far out neighborhoods that will benefit from air pollution reduction. So to me, I think I don't have the answer, but I do know where we should start looking is how we help devise new agreements between the operators, between the concessions, so that we can de-risk our sector. And my pledge is to maybe bring the utilities in there. I don't know, Johnny, that's a possibility to bring them, because the utilities have a better standing. They are actually more solvent companies. And if they are partners in this, if they're not just the providers of the electricity, but partners, maybe that could be one answer.
Thank you very much, Margarita. John, I saw you a little bit very interested in this, certainly. What is your feeling?
What is my feeling? Wow.
On what Margarita said, I mean.
You can disagree.
No, I totally agree. I think the de-risking is the issue. I think, but I think at the end of the day, it's a public policy issue. I think we subsidize all kinds of things that we shouldn't. And providing backstops, whether it's financial backstops or creditworthiness backstops, I think that's something that I think has been done at the national level with PPAs. I think doing that at the municipal level is a big difference. And I think not only in terms of institutional capacity and
You're right.
Kind of nitty gritty on the technical side, but also in terms of creditworthiness. But one bright side of that, and this is more about transit, you do see models like in Bogota, for example, where they are starting to move towards fleet provision and working towards fixed payments. those are types of things that investors can get excited about. And I actually think that's probably, in my mind, is probably the best practices right now, at least where we are today in 2020. But clearly moving a PPA down into a municipal level where you can de-risk requires places like the World Bank or places like the IFC that can step in and manage those risks and structure those risks, and then maybe even stand behind some of those risks for those players.
Yeah, I would agree very much with you. I mean, moving from the sovereign to the sub-sovereign, it's another level of complexity. It's far more complex. So de-risking that sub-sovereign level certainly is more difficult. I was also interested in something that Margarita said about transport is a service, not a business. I mean, the same can be argued about electricity, obviously. But I agree on one thing you said very much. The state, usually the financial and sometimes governance state of the transport company is usually a little bit less solid and less advanced than power companies. It's not always the case, but I would agree with you very much. And I look very much forward to listen to Juan Carlos later on the Chilean example. Dr. Fengan, I mean, it's very, you started first, then we put it there. This technological shift, so there is a technological shift in being. It may create equity issues within societies, obviously. Will everyone be able one day to afford an e-vehicle? Which is quite an interesting question, I have to say.
First of all, I think the cost of EV has to continue to come down. You know, I think what's happening in the EV sector is it's quite similar to the solar panel industry. You know, I think now the solar power plant, the cost of solar power plant is equivalent to a fossil fuel based power plants. I think EV, most experts agree that the cost of EV will be on par with the internal combustion engine, in the 5 to 10 years. And I remember 5 years ago, I was invited by World Bank to go to India to talk about the EV experience in China. And we have a room of the government officials from Delhi. They are very dismissive. They think EV is so expensive. It's impossible. The public money will be better used to retrofit the diesel engines. Now, last year they made a totally change their attitude. India is fully embrace of electrification. So I think this is about cut down the cost. Also for the average citizen, so when we talk about electrification, we should also talk about the e-bike, like electrify, mopeds, three-wheelers. In China, people mostly focus on, EVs, but I think China has like 100 millions of e-bikes. I think, this contribute greatly to get rid of the diesel powered gasoline engine internal engine powered motorcycles, and so I think the panelists said the public electric bus is a future really future direction for the developing countries. I think that's how goes through the electric micromobility to e-bus. I think that's going to be provide clean transportation for the developing countries. But we talk about how to finance the e-bus. I think government should be ready to in next develop. I was in a dinner with the minister from the Ethiopia last night. They are developing 10 years plan. So it's very important for them to develop, in that 10 years plan to develop, infrastructure and roadmap for, for electric public transportation. I think because by the next 5 to 10 years, the cost of those vehicles will come down dramatically. They have become competitive to traditional internal combustion engine vehicles.
Yeah. I have to say it is really fascinating. I mean, let me ask you a question. Do you really see the same kind of curve that we saw in solar panels in electric vehicles? You're far more competent than I am in this, so I kindly ask you, what do you think?
You mean the similar kind of a trends?
Yeah, in the same time, the same shape of the curve?
Curve, yes, yeah. I think it's like battery cost has come down dramatically. I think people talk about $100 per kilowatt hour for the battery cost that's going to be on par with internal combustion engine. So I think the difference is only how long it's going to take. There's maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, but eventually when the scaling, when you scale up, I think the cost will be down. Like in China, there are 400 EV startups. I think most of them will die, not can survive, but they are help to bring down the cost, and they are training the next generation of engineers and managers to run the e-mobility system. So that's the value of the created ecosystem. I think that exactly is what's going to happen. The EV cost will be dramatically lower. Yeah. Next.
I mean, I have to say it's fascinating because you see, I've seen. I used to be the head of transport, but in the last 10 years or so, I looked more at energy, and I could see when electricity company were bidding for projects, they were bidding with the price of PV panels in 2 years, because you bid, but you buy them in 2 years. So you have to calculate where they are in the curve, and it's very, very interesting. Probably to see something similar one day in the transportation, in the manufacturing of cars, where they will offer a price which is a little bit down the road in the curve. Very, very interesting. Please. Okay, I'm very, very happy. Please go ahead. Don't ask me, but
sorry for disrupting your conversation. I'm Ravi Ponnapureddy. I'm a director of transportation for Regional Planning Agency in Louisiana. Quick question. The model of Margaret explained with utilities taking the lead and trying to finance that, it's a win-win situation. But my question is to everyone, not all countries are producing electricity in a cleaner way, right? There's still coal-generated electricity. So now, isn't that conflicting situation where you're generating still electricity but with not cleaner ways, but you're trying to use the electricity produced from that and push it to electric car market or vehicles? So I feel it's a conflict where we are pushing the pollution from one place to another place. So should we first focus on making 100% clean energy and then move to electricity? That's first question. I forgot my second question, if I remember.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Annie, do you want to answer? I'm ready to answer.
Yeah, I think clearly you need to clean up the power grid. I think in China 70% of the power is still powered by thermal energy and coal-based. But China has a big plan for renewable energy portfolio. So they want to have by 2050, 80% power will come from renewable energy. But still over the life cycle of the analysis, electric vehicles still more clean, than the traditional vehicles. But I agree with you, for countries, they need to speed up their effort to embrace clean and renewable energy sources.
Yes, I wanted to thank Tuan because Fen and I know for a long time, and I know the the institution he leads, has done this analysis on a wheel to exhaust base. Now I forgot the whole, from the beginning to the end of the emissions, so the life cycle emissions. And actually, because of the efficiency of the electric motors, is still, even under circumstances where we're generating electricity with coal sources, is still better to transition to electric vehicles. So that is a myth that should be demythified. The other thing important to remember is that we don't have time to wait until the electricity sector cleans up, and then we think about electrification because it'll be too late. We already are running out of time. So we can't wait. We really had to do things in hand and actually push for policies that bring both benefits. That's why actually I like to work in this integration of the power sector and the transportation sector.
Thank you. And also one thing, the life of assets in the power sector is very long, 20, 30 years, or even for solar it's 10 years. So the only solution is really to do it in parallel. It must go together, because if we think about cleaning the power sector first, and then it would take a monumental amount of time. But please.
Yes, hi. This is Oscar Diaz. I'm former advisor to the mayor of Bogota. And I just wanted to share the things that we found in Bogota that I think are useful for the panel. One of the things that Enel, in the case of Bogota, is pretty much a monopoly. So it was hard to have that competition with NG that you guys had in Chile. So that's something to keep in mind, that there is also this problem of the providers. One from the energy side, that in Colombia, and especially in Bogota, it's mostly Enel. And the other one is with the manufacturers of the buses, that we need a lot of competition in that. And we got a really hard time when we had the contract for the BRT buses, and everybody wanted electric buses. But the reality was that the only provider was BYD, and it was hard to find that competition. Now we are going to have almost 500 electric buses, 12 meters, and you have a variety of providers. So that was much better to do. One thing,
Oscar, just to interrupt, I totally agree with you. And one thing that we found at IFC is that a lot of municipalities are approached by manufacturers, and it's like it's worse than sole sourcing, because they basically come to them with an offer and a binder that says, here, why don't you do this? And there isn't the capacity on the municipal side to really know even whether they're getting taken for a ride. That's horrible. Whether they're getting a good deal or not. That's a better way to say that.
Yeah.
So 100%, the supply chain issues are very real, and it's not only it's both on energy and on the manufacturing side. 100% agree with you.
And the other thing is that we couldn't ask the Enel to buy the buses, so we went another way, and it worked for these 12-meter buses, and it was that they bought or rented the depots where the buses are. So that was another way to have them commit, not with the fleet that we wanted, but at least with the infrastructure, with the space that they had to get ready for the electrification. So that was something else that we were able to do, and that was also very, very useful. There is always the risk that they have, and I think John mentioned it before. One of the things that we created in Bogota was to have a direct payment to the bus provider. So we cut these payments between the operator and the bus provider, and it worked very well for both the BRT buses and the 12-meter buses. And of course, for the electric buses, that was the best way to do it. And the other thing that I want to ask the panel as a question is, what do you guys see as the batteries? Because that's also a concern. What's going to happen with the batteries once they are used by the buses? Of course, the Chinese say, okay, we will use them in rural areas, but that's a big question when we are all moving to the electrification of mobility.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Is it in the same line, or we just answered this last question and then we come to you?
The same line, if you could also discuss
please.
recyclability of batteries, especially lithium-ion batteries, because that's got a very important role in electrification.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Correct.
I want to do a commentary. We have to have a point of view about a wide picture. For example, when you ask about the produce of the electricity, if it's not clean, the participation of the public transportation in the use, in the consumption of electricity, it will be very, very small, it's minimum. If you're thinking about the consumption of all the city, so if you think I don't buy an electric bus because the source of energy is not clean, well, it's a very valid position. Maybe you can buy gas GNC buses or GNL buses, but the participation of the consumption is very, very minimum, no? So about the batteries, probably in the future it could be a new technology of recycling batteries, but if I expect the moment, if I wait until the moment that issue is solved definitely, I never will incorporate the buses. To make the decisions, we have to take some risk. It's impossible to take a pure exact decision without any risk, without any bad result or consequence. However, you have in the development of the project, when you when you put the buses in the street, you will realize a lot of mistakes that you make. But you have to be disposed to run, to take that risk and to make that mistake and control it, because there's not a perfect project, never. Probably in the future we have different sources, like hydrogen, no? Maybe the electric bus is a momentary solution between the diesel bus and the hydrogen bus. But if we expect the hydrogen solution, we're still with the diesel bus, and with the pollution and the noise and all that problem, and the oil, the residuos, the waste of the buses. So my experience is make the decision and take some risk. You'll never have all the solutions to all the issues related to a technological change and operational change. You probably will make some mistakes, will have some regrets, but believe me, trust me, that is most valuable, the achievements that you have for the people, especially.
Any other comment? Please, maybe, and then you, please, Dr. Kyung Kim.
Yes, I'd like to share my experience on my research on the electric buses. I conducted a feasibility study for finding if the electric bus can be applicable for serving the BRT lane. And I realized that there are some important factors that affect on that service. First one is the size of the battery capacity. And usually 100 or 120 kilowatt has been used for the electric buses, and it's related with the range of learning for the route. And another important factor is on the traffic and the road condition. I made the model for evaluating the performance of the electric buses and checking for the range of the electric bus on BRT, and the number of stops and the number, the grade on the geometric have a big impact on the performance of electric bus. So if the road condition is not considered well, then the electric bus cannot get the target, the performance on the area with the high grade on the urban area. So I recommend you first consider the conditions of traffic and the road geometry for considering that electric bus to be served as a transit.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fengan, maybe?
Yeah, I have a quick comment on the battery. I think, recycling is very important. I think it's going to become more and more important as we have more and more, battery. I think China has a lot of, set up a lot of companies to ready to make, the recycling, and also the secondary life of battery after they used for transportation, but they can use for energy storage. So that has been explored. The other key is some of the rare earth material that's used for make batteries. So there may be limited resources worldwide. So only through the recycling to recover the rare earth material, so that can make that sustainable. I think Chile is a big country for supply that key components. So I think that's very important.
Margarita, do you want to say anything, or?
Yeah, one more comment on this, because this is tied into issues on the lack of supply chain and lack of competitors. Because when we start doing some analysis as NGO, we did some for Chile. This is just, of course, theoretical analysis. We asked the manufacturer what was the warranty on the battery, And they gave us different years for different countries because of the road conditions, because of the driving conditions. So I agree with you, Mr. Q. But interesting that we need, in the countries where we had those wrong conditions, like more bumpy roads or more higher temperatures, is where we actually need better warranty, because it's actually replacing the battery more often is more costly. So it's interesting that because we have few companies, we need more competition. We need some that actually can provide. I think BYD gave, I don't know Bogota how many years, but for Peru it was 7 years. But in the US, Proterra gives up to 12 years of a warranty of a battery. There's a huge difference between 7 and 12 for financing terms. So I think it's another point to reemphasize. We need more automakers and more options so we can have better solutions.
I think it's a fascinating discussion, I have to say, and it is a discussion that doesn't concern only transport. It concerns transport, it concerns power, it concerns extractives industries. I have to say I've chaired for more than 2 years the Global Batteries Alliance at the World Economic Forum, and I have to say it is complex, without any doubt. The idea is that batteries that can be used in transportation can be then used, when put all together, in off-grid system as batteries to have more hours of power at dusk and dawn. Then at a certain point, the reuse of the battery, of course, is not possible anymore, and they will have to be recycled, as Dr. Fangan was very rightly saying. And at that point, it is very, very important. Also because in the calculation that the World Bank has done, I have a lot of hats here, apparently. So I'm also the Global Director for Energy and Extractives. In the reality, the calculation that we have done is that for many metals and minerals, there are not enough metals and minerals all over the world to power all these energy transition. So recycling is key for energy transition. And then, when you go down the line, you continue in this cycle, there is not only the matter of extractive, it's also the matter how to extract. What is the impact on population? What is the impact on environment? What is the impact on other resources, such as water, for example, or timber, to say other things? So it is really very complex, and lithium is not a problem. But for example, cobalt, which is part of the battery, 65% of cobalt production come from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So you can see now the kind of social, environmental problem that you can have if you go only towards more exploitation of resources instead of having very clear reuse and recycling plans. So I think it's actually a fantastic discussion that really goes all over the cycle. John, if you will forgive me, I will ask Dr. Kyo Kim first, because we are in the same subject. So Dr. Kyo Kim, how do you see the role of electric mobility in moving towards the smart cities model?
I will start my comment with the example of the Korea case. Actually, my organization is located at Sejong City. That is a new city. It's a government complex city, and the Korea has a plan to build a smart city at Sejong City. And the main purpose of building the smart city is to provide the city with more comfortable and more eco-friendly mobility service. And actually, the Sejong City considers the several the mobility service based on electric bus and electric cars and autonomous vehicle based on the autonomous shuttle. And basically, we think that the mobility service will be provided with on-demand service at the smart city. So I think the e-mobility will contribute to improve the mobility service as well as contribute to develop the technology. And I think that is the first step for incorporating transportation system with a power system at the Sejong City. And the autonomous shuttle will provide more comparable the service to the citizen for example, the pilot test are planning on demonstrating at Sejong City, and if you visit Sejong City, then you can download from the website, and then you can use the application for selecting your destination, and you can use the autonomous shuttle. And I think e-mobility will be the core component for building the smart city, and it can make the transportation system in an urban area be cleaner and more compatible with, I mentioned the mobility service. And I think also new technology can be incorporated with more functions based on the electric, the car, the cases. And yeah, that's my opinion.
Dr. Kim, thank you very much. Thank you for that. John, going back, sorry to 1 second. So I can see very well, I mean, in Europe, in Korea, I mean, this development. But what are the challenges that for example, an investor in developing countries like IFC find when they have the opportunity to finance e-mobility? What are the challenges, really, and the solutions, maybe, or mitigations?
Okay. This is one of these questions where you say, where do I start? I would break it down into probably 3 categories. I think there's probably institutional things. I think there's technology things, some of which we've already talked about. And then there's the kind of the financial part. I think especially on transit, I would say less so on micro-transit and things where it's entirely, kind of private sector or even VC-led in those cases. But what we find, and I'm kind of biased towards electric buses. I'm on the infrastructure team, and we've spent a lot of time on transit. On the institutional side, you're asking municipal governments to embrace new technology, and that's tough. Not only from a capacity perspective, but also from a risk aversion perspective, which Juan Carlos mentioned a minute ago. You said, make the decision and take the risk. That is not what we hear from our municipal counterparties. I think that was extraordinary to hear that come from you. Transit is not something that people are forgiving about. I think they expect transit to work. It's one of those things where if everything goes perfectly, nobody says anything, but the minute something's wrong, everybody blows a gasket. I can remember Trans-Santiago in 2006, not so easy. So transit is supposed to work, and I think when you're taking risks and you're with the public authorities trying to get them to take a risk on something new, it's a challenge. It's not a Silicon Valley type environment. The other thing is procurement itself is very much biased towards upfront cost, and I think it's easy. You can, it's hard to dispute when you've got this proposal and that proposal, and one's cheaper than the other. But we're trying to kind of nudge people towards total cost of ownership discussions or life cycle costs, where you kind of give electrics a fair shake, and that you analyze things over the life of the bus or the truck or whatever type of vehicle you're trying to procure. So those are 2 very difficult things that we bump into very quickly on public sector. I mean, technology being the second bucket, I would say it's just still very expensive, and again, that coupled with the upfront cost bias in the procurement side, it's kind of a cocktail for inertia in terms of moving towards electrics. And then performance issues. I think, again, if you have those risks and you have high upfront costs, and then you have examples of buses like I can think of in the United States, even places like Albuquerque or LA, Minneapolis, places where it's very hot or it's very cold, or it's very hilly or bumpy. It's easy to point to examples where it didn't work. And if you're a risk-averse public official, you don't have to Google very hard to come up with those examples of why I might not want to do this. And if I'm only here for 4 years, it might be easier to put those diesel fleets into action one more time. And the third bucket, I would say, is financial. The models that are out there, China being one, but also in the United States, for example, a lot of OECD countries, there's a lot of subsidies at the national level that are passed down to the municipal transit authorities. And those just aren't available in emerging markets countries. So we're left with the problem of having more difficult sovereign environments to begin with, local currency risk vis-a-vis where the financing sources are, and then also just issues with you don't have those subsidies. So you're trying to make new business models work in environments that are already challenging. So it's not easy, and I think that's why I would say that the expansion of electric mobility so far has been exciting, but I would say maybe a little disappointing. I think 5 years ago we thought that it was going to take off. My sense is that it's going to take longer than we expect, but it's also, when it does happen, it's going to be a bigger change than any of us would have ever imagined.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, John. Please, the gentleman.
Thank you very much for the discussion. My name is Daniel Perea, and I work with IFC on sector economics. So my question relates to what John was mentioning, and is, if I think from the mayor point of view, the political capital that is needed to put this type of reforms in place is significant. And I don't want to be remembered as the mayor that put all those electric buses that don't work anymore. But two things. The first one is, are the technical solutions of electric vehicles and electric buses at a point where they're adequate to offer a solution at scale? And if so, at what scale? What should be targeting? Mega cities, middle-sized cities, smaller cities? And related to that, us as World Bank Group, do we have the tools to help cities assess the adequacy of potential solutions for electric vehicles that will help mayors to take those risks that we all would want them to take? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Who would like to take these? Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you.
Well, when I talk about risk, I talking about reasonable risk anywhere. But because Transantiago is the opposite example. Everything in Transantiago, in original Transantiago, have a lot of planning.
Yeah.
But the fail was huge. No? So, so about the question, in a big point of view, like you said, the electromobility has a lot of profits for everyone, especially for the cities. In a bigger city, bigger profits. In public health, in environment, and especially, and I think that's the most important, the preference of the users, but for the public transport. The real fight that we have to do is against the use of the private car. Yeah. And the electromobility is attractive for the users. It's attractive because they don't have noise, they don't have smoke, they have a comfortable experience inside the vehicle, and usually the vehicle has a lot of elements of good performance, like air condition, the USB chargers, the Wi-Fi, everything. So, however, the scale is absolutely proportional to the use of the vehicles, of the electric vehicles. And it's another externality, positive externality, is for the location of the garage and the depots. With a diesel bus, the usual is the depot. It's far from the center of the downtown, no. So or the high density population areas. With the electric buses, you can have the depot even in a subway. Because there's no noise, there's no smoke, no. So and the electricity, it comes everywhere without risk for the people, because a fuel pump is risky, no. So you need a lot of regulations and requirements to install a fuel pump. But to install a plug, electric plug, you can do anywhere. So I think can I resume this with this conclusion? Our electrical operators, our companies of the buses companies that use electric buses, they don't want any more diesel buses. Just want to take the electric buses.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Really very interesting. Any other comments on this? Please, Margarita.
I have one comment on the state of the technology. So I think in terms of battery development and battery research, maybe that is advanced. And so we know they work. Now, how many buses can we have right now? And when we have procurement orders, they take time, right? Like the ones in Bogota, the ones in Cali, you see them arriving in the port, in Medellin as well. Like you had to go, it's like something you had to make it for you. So it takes time because they're not just ready in a store for you to take 5 or 3. So still, I think to get to scale, we still need more manufacturing capacity, especially if we want to really transform large fleets. But what I was thinking is that we still need to finish the adaptation of that technology because in a way, the examples of Chinese technology working in China is great. When they brought the first BYD buses to work in Latin America, they didn't last as long because the conditions were so different. So we still are hoping that those buses have the same longevity, the same duration or durability as the diesel buses because they work in the rough conditions. We have higher urban populations using buses. They are crowded. And we maybe wait a lot, I don't know. Maybe people should be on a diet so the buses don't have a lot of heavy weight to carry. But the buses in Latin America do have and we need to still work on that. So I think many cities have done pilots. I think Chile, you have like years of pilots with BYD buses. Lima is doing another one. I know Bogota did. So we still need to happen in other countries so you can adapt those buses and improve them to the conditions so we get to the scale.
Margarita, thank you very much. Actually, the next question goes very much towards our colleague from IFC was saying, and it is with you, Juan Carlos, I have to say. The question, I was thinking about this while we were discussing, and it's actually interesting. So, in your opinion, how is the general public responding to investments in e-buses, and are they ready to pay for cleaner and better quality services, which in the developing world is very much of a point. What is the affordability? Am I ready to pay for something and make it cleaner, but for me it's the same kind of service, more or less? I'm really interested in your experience.
Well, recently we knew a study from IADB about the performance of the electromobility in Santiago. And one of the most remarkable aspects is the reception of the public. As 70% of the people is available to wait 3 more minutes for our electric bus. And 50% is available to expect 5 minutes for an electric bus. No? These are very, very illustrative data. That and we have another other aspect is interesting. In Santiago's buses, we use a system to
Turnstiles. Yeah.
Turnstile. And in the electric buses, we don't put this system, and the payment is the same. The people pay for use the bus. When some people don't pay, or the rest of the passengers made a social pressure for express they are annoyed for this conduct. And finally, these buses have a very good evaluation for the public in the studies from service quality that we're making permanently. And even some services have note 6.3 in a maximum of 7. No, it's a very high assessment of the evaluation of that services. But I want to mention a specific issue. The best drivers of the electric buses are women. The women, yeah, yes.
We take care of things.
No, the fact is, when the women drive the bus, they obtain 10% more of autonomy of the bus with the same electric charge. No, it passes from 200 kilometers or 250, 200 to 220 kilometers of autonomy with the same charge. No, it's very interesting. So this is a gender benefit for a kind of work that usually is just for men. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but these are very, very powerful data. I have to say, it's very interesting to see the very high level of social acceptance, not to mention the point about gender. Any comment on this from the panel or any other comments? Obviously, I'm no economist myself. I suppose that a lot will depend as well on the kind of income of the population. I work a lot on Africa. I suppose it would be a little bit more complex, but it is nevertheless extremely interesting. Now, I'm guilty because I don't know if it's first the lady or the gentleman, but we'll have the lady first.
Thank you. I'm Tara. I'm from the ITDP, and we're working a lot on electrification to support cities in their endeavors toward electrification. This is very illuminating. I will be recruiting some of you to come talk at our conference later in the year, so see me after. My question, though, is what other supportive systems can cities be putting into place to, I think it was Juan Carlos who mentioned that one of the biggest challenges is just getting people out of cars and making cars the less attractive, less desirable options. So, I mean, we're looking at things like congestion, charging, and low emission zones, zero emission zones. What are you seeing in terms of supportive systems that we can help encourage and build to make the electric bus the best choice?
Thank you very much. Great question. I have to say it's more a question of policies on how to shoe in, like actually was done for electricity for renewables. Anyone want to take this call? Please, Margarita.
Yeah, absolutely, and nice to meet you, Tara. I was actually looking for you at the ITDP reception. So, no, absolutely. I think we need electrification of transport. For all of us working on transport is one of the things that we're working on, but it's not absolutely the thing to work on, because we need to ensure that there is good public transportation that can efficiently move people in cities so that we don't have traffic congestion, so we don't have traffic deaths, so that we clean the environment. Most of the cities they're working on have higher levels of pollution, so we mostly due to transportation, motorbikes, with very incomplete combustion. So I think we need to think of it in an integrated way. So yes, congestion charging or urban tolls and things that actually start taxing private use of cars to bring the money to public transport is all welcome. Yesterday, which was very good, there was a huge discussion about how we pay for public transport and the issue of land use development and came up, and I agree, because the land around bus corridors, and I think we're not taking advantage of things like TOD or others to pay for public transport and how we revitalize economies with that. So I think we have to be creative about how we support a better public transportation. The plug for electrification is because we know that in the long run, electricity is a cheaper fuel. The buses have lower cost of maintenance. Under a good governance, a good service agreement, a good financing system, this system should be actually more efficient to be run. So hopefully that means better ways of operating and bringing more and keeping them more.
Thank you. John, do you want to go?
No, I was just going to say, for some reason, in the water and power sectors, it's relatively accepted that you pay for the use of those things. You receive a power bill. You don't receive a mobility bill. So, in places like London or Singapore, they can get away with these kind of zone charges and things like this. In developing markets, that's political suicide. So you get things like license plate restrictions, but only once there's like an air quality emergency or things like that. So it's a major public policy problem, I think, for emerging markets. I think you can do things like that in like the US or Canada, maybe in Europe, where people are willing to pay for these types of things. That might change when I think climate doesn't do it, unfortunately, just politically speaking, but local air pollution might push things over the line, and people might be willing to do that when you start having air quality emergencies and such.
Very good point. Please, Dr. Fangan.
When I back to Beijing office, I always take public transportation to work. I can, in some big cities in China, like Shenzhen, they are already 100%, buses are electric. So Beijing has 2 years, in the next 2 years, they're going to be all electric buses. So I think the electric buses, I took it, so they just more appealing. I think electric bus, they are cleaner, quieter, and more comfortable. I think they have a new design of the bus. It's a lower floor, very easy to get access. I think I realized that, to make the, because people complain about public transportation, it's just very crowded, very noisy, very dirty. But the electric buses give you opportunity to say it's very, comfortable and clean. And I think that's kind of, increase appealing and attractiveness, for people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The gentleman, thank you for your patience, by the way.
Oh, no problem. Hi, I'm Reda from the French Development Agency. We've been talking a lot about e-buses. I would like to know the opinion of the panel about the potential for e-vehicles for other high mileage, light-duty vehicles, and particularly such as taxis, shared taxis, minibuses. The performance of the batteries are improving. So maybe today a taxi driver can drive the whole day with a single battery charge. So is there a potential for a massive uptake for e-taxis in the near future with a strong sustainability impact? Thanks.
Thank you very much. E-taxis. Yes, please, Dr. Kyung Kim.
Actually, I think it has some limitation for spreading the e-taxis, especially in the case of the Korea, and because the range of the average taxi drivers is about 300 kilometers, and so at first about in 2010 the Korea tried to use the taxi as the electric car, but there were some limitation of the standard of the charging and the limitation of driving range. But in future, because of increasing the driving lanes of the electric taxi, I think there is the opportunity for using the taxis in the future.
Thank you very much. Please, Dr. Fangan.
I think e-taxi is happening very quick. I think in China, a lot of city has planned just to demand all the taxi to be full electric in next 3 to 5 years, and not just the e-taxi. I think in some of the e-hailing and network company like Uber, also in China is Didi. I think they are encouraging the drivers to switch to electric vehicles. I think if you go to Shenzhen and Shanghai, a lot of most taxis now are either pure electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. So I think it's happening, and the mileage has been increasing. The people talk about the 500 kilometer range, for the new models.
Very interesting. Thank you. Last question, I'm afraid, and it's for this lady, please.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, my name is Annika. I'm from the World Bank. I have a question on battery swap technology, because we haven't really touched on that, but especially on shared fleets, it's very important because they don't have time to charge the car for an hour because it's running a lot of miles. And also, I think in India right now, they're doing a lot on battery swap for 2- and 3-wheelers. But then, of course, there's a challenge with the industry and how to standardize these batteries so you can swap them all the time, quality control. So I just wanted to hear from the panel what their ideas are on that technology.
Thank you very much. Battery sharing. Please.
Actually, Korea has 3 kinds of the electric buses: the battery swapping, and the wireless charging and plug-in type. And we tested the functionality of the battery the swapping electric bus, and it takes about 3 minutes for swapping. the battery on the top of the electric bus, and it's a huge automation the system for swapping for the electric buses. And actually 3 to 4 the battery can be replaced at the same time, and there is the limitation because of the cost for installing the battery swapping stations. And currently in Korea, Jeju and Jeju Island learning that the swapping type of electric for the public as the transit.
Thank you very much. Please, Dr. Fengan.
Yeah, I think the battery swapping for buses is the perfect solutions. I think for the private cars, it is much more challenge. I think, because you have to create a common platform for different brands of vehicles to share same kind of battery. This is a tremendous challenge. But even though for some China, like automakers like Beijing, electric vehicle, so they want to still offer the option to battery swapping. So I think for private sectors, some of the manufacturers, if they generate enough volume, they still think that battery swapping can be a good option. But it's very hard to create kind of uniform, cross-branding type of platform for battery swapping service.
Thank you very much. So this concludes the panel. I mean, I have to say something. I have to say, quite interesting panel. I mean, sub-sovereign, certainly it's very much of a problem. I mean, far more complex than sovereign. Capacity, one of the gentlemen in the audience made the point, is there a capacity to develop, successfully implement in all over the world this kind of schemes. De-risking came very, very importantly. I loved the little glimpse on the future about autonomous technology, and I fully agree, I have to say, with Juan Carlos, how difficult it is for the public sector to make decisions in a moment of very, very quick technological change. It is at the same time a risk and an opportunity, and yes, quite difficult when you have a political position. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to all of you. And just a round of applause for our panelists.